Hi, I'm Lucas, and today we're going to talk through the RentVision report card. A little bit of backstory with this report card. Oftentimes in the past, we would talk with clients and we would tell them things like how many website visits they had, or how many walkthrough video tours their community gave in a given month, or how many phone calls that they had. The problem with those numbers was they weren't very helpful. It would be hard for a client to know, is that good, is that bad, is that average, is that below average? And there was no way for them to know how that compared against their peers. And so the whole goal of the report card was to create a way for clients to know how their communities are stacking up against similar properties in their property class. So with the community report card, we're typically using this during the quarterly reviews. And the thing to understand about the report card is it doesn't necessarily tell you whether you're doing a good job or a bad job. It's simply telling you how you compare against similar properties for that given month. And they're more like indicators on a dash, because there could be a low number, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a problem. For example, if you have a really high occupancy, but your website visits were slightly below average, it doesn't mean that you need to drive more traffic because you don't necessarily have any vacancies that you need to fill. So the report card is simply helping us to identify certain areas that the marketing or leasing or revenue may be below or above the average, and from that it helps us to know where to look. So with the report card, we initially thought about doing more numbers where we show up and down trends and how much things have changed. But there's just a lot of information, already a lot of data points that we're trying to convey information about. So instead we thought it'd be easier to go with something that we all know and have association with from the past, and that's using letter grades and colors. So when we're looking at the report card, we can go down and we can look at one category, and if there is an A in green, we know that that is an area that's doing above average. By comparison, if we go and we see an area that has a C plus in yellow, now we know, okay, here's an area where we're below average compared to peers, and we have the indicator on the dash to go dig a little further and figure out why that could be. So with the report card, there's really three main areas. There's marketing, leasing, and revenue. Now it's important to note when we have integration and we can see the available units and the upcoming occupancy situation of a property, it helps us to know whether or not some of the things we're seeing in leasing could and are a problem, and help us to diagnose those a little bit better. Inside the marketing section, there's obviously lots of things that we could look at from a number standpoint. But what we're trying to do here is identify the key pieces or the key stream of how somebody begins to engage and then converts to a lease. And so the first step is coming to the website. So how many website visitors were there compared to the average? And then the second thing we look at is, okay, now that they're on the website, how many of those visitors are taking the virtual tours and getting inside of the floor plans? The next one is the Google cost per minute. And really that one is helping us know if the traffic that we're driving to the website is being done in an efficient way. We're looking at how much does it cost versus how long do they spend, making sure that the people that are coming to the website are engaging and staying for a long enough period of time. And then the fourth one is a really critical one. It's, okay, how many of those visitors that are taking those tours are actually converting to a phone call for the leasing team? When it comes to the leasing side, really what we're trying to do here is help you see how the on-site teams are handling the phone calls and those conversations, and what that looks like from a conversion standpoint. So with the first metric, we're looking at calls answered. We're looking at how many calls during business hours are being answered by the team. And then the second thing is that with the phone calls they're answering, on average, how long are they spending in those conversations? How long are they engaging with those prospective residents? Now, as we're looking at converting those phone calls to leases, we're looking at, okay, what's the average amount of days that a unit goes from the application to the move-in. So we're really looking at vacant days from when they receive an app to when they move in. And then with the fourth section, we're looking at the average amount of calls per lease. So how many calls is it taking the leasing team to convert to a lease? Now the third section is the revenue section. And the revenue section really is the most important section and dictates a lot of the decisions and things we're going to do in the marketing and leasing sections. But the first main metric in the revenue section is the RentVision occupancy, or RVO. It's essentially telling us what is the occupancy of the property going to be in the next few weeks, and then compare it against their target or their goal occupancy. And by having those two numbers, we know whether or not they're going to be at the occupancy that they'd want to be at for this point in the year. And that helps us know whether or not we need to help them drive more traffic or maybe less traffic if they're going to already be really full. And then the second metric there is anticipated daily loss. Now, each community is going to have a certain amount of vacant units, throughout the year on given weeks, obviously more some weeks, less others. So there is always going to be a certain amount of vacancy loss, but helping you see what your current vacancy loss is versus your target vacancy loss helps you know how much potential there is to generate additional revenue simply by filling those vacancies. And then the third unit is pretty straightforward. It's just helping the on-site teams know how many available units that they have versus their target for that point in the year. And then the fourth metric is more of a metric that helps them know how many leases that they have generated during this time period that we're looking at, so they can kind of see the whole picture all the way from visiting the website down to the actual leases that were generated through the marketing. So one of the big questions that clients ask us as we're first showing them the report card is, how did you come up with these targets? And so there's a lot of math behind the scenes with these targets, but the basics behind it is we looked at all the communities we work with and divided them up by different property classes and started figuring out the average amount of website visits or the average amount of phone calls in each given month for each different property class, so that we can compare apples to apples with the report card. When it comes to the letter grade, we initially had started with the C, but quickly realized that if you are doing the same as your peers, you're doing good. Things are going well. There's not a problem. And so we actually start with a B+. So if you're doing the average, you have the average amount of phone calls or the average amount of website visits, that's a B+, because there's not a problem. Things are going good. And now when things are above the average, that's when we move into the A. And when things are significantly below the average, we start moving into the C and then the D area to help create an indicator that there is a big discrepancy between how your community is performing versus your peers in that same area. So let's talk through an example that could come up in a quarterly review call with an advisor who's using one of these report cards with a client. So let's say, as we're looking at the revenue section, we identify that there's actually going to be a vacancy issue here in the next few weeks. And then we look over to the marketing section, and sure enough, the website visits are actually below average. They're right around the B- area, which in turn is making the video tours a little bit lower than average, and in turn making the phone calls lower than average. So that helps us know that most likely the problem is not just phone calls or video tours, it's that we need to drive more traffic to the website so that more people can take video tours and then they can turn into the phone call leads. So in a situation like this, we can see that the problem is actually there's not enough website traffic. So to help solve the vacancy issue before it actually becomes a vacancy issue, the recommendation could be something like driving more traffic through Google ads or Facebook ads, turning on additional campaigns or increasing budget, things like that to drive that additional traffic to solve that vacancy issue. Okay, so here's another example, and this is This is an example that we run into a lot with clients, is we look at the revenue side and their occupancy is actually going to be really high in the next few weeks. They don't have anything that's going to be available. But then when you look to the leasing area, you'll notice that while the on-site teams are answering the phone calls, the average call duration is getting a C+. Now, that initially makes it seem as though there could be a problem with how they're handling the phone calls, but that oftentimes happens when you have really high occupancy because those conversations end up being a little shorter because you have to tell them that there's nothing available. So as we dig into it further, while the grade is low, again, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a problem. It simply means that's a place we can look into. And in a case like this, it's because of a high occupancy. And that's the RentVision report card. If you have additional questions or want more information, I'm sure your marketing advisor will be more than happy to show you around.